Check 1, 2. EPA control, check 1, 2.
We're about to get started, but if you all wouldn't be so shy, especially on my left here, if you guys could fill in some of the seats from the front here and then in the back, so we would really appreciate it. So we'll get started very soon. So anyone who's brave, I may even do a special dance or something. But if you guys could do that, we really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, and those of you in the back, there's plenty of seats up here in the front, so if you all wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great. Actually, I'll come.
Well, welcome to everyone. Welcome to the EPA. It's good to see you today. And wanted to introduce and share with some folks that are actually in attendance that are going to come up and speak in a few moments. But we have Chairman Smith here from Texas. Thank you, Chairman, for coming. Senator Rounds, thank you for coming. Well, Senator Inhofe, my senator from the great state of Oklahoma. We also have Dr. McClellan here, along with Dr. Honeycutt and Dr. Cox and Dr. Gilman, all of whom are going to share a few words in a moment with respect to the changes and decisions we're making here today with respect to our FACs and advisory committees that we have as an agency. And to that end, let me just share with you a little bit about the changes we've been about over the last several months. We began this journey a few months ago to evaluate our SAB, BOSC, and KSAC boards. Boards that serve us and commissions that serve us to provide counsel to us in an independent fashion. And as you know, these advisory committees are very, very essential to the rulemaking that we're engaged in as an agency. And one of the things that I've emphasized consistently during my time as administrator is that process matters. And that as we engage in rulemaking, we need to respect the process that Congress has set out as far as the rulemaking process, but we also need to respect the record, the information, the science that we're relying upon to make decisions. And when you think about that role of KSAC and SAB and BOSC, those very committees are giving us the bedrock of science to ensure that we're making informed decisions. And when we have members of those committees that have received tens of millions of dollars in grants at the same time that they're advising this agency on rulemaking, that is not good and that's not right. And so, in fact, over the last 3 years, some of the members of those three boards, of KSAC, SAB, and BOSC, have received $77 million over a 3-year period. And these committees and these individuals that provide us counsel, by definition, are supposed to be providing independent counsel to us. And so to the American people across the country, we want to ensure that there's integrity in the process and that the scientists that are advising us are doing so with not any type of appearance of conflict. And when you receive that much money, $77 million, just over the last 3 years, there's a question that arises about independence. And so today I'm signing a directive. And the directive is, as individuals serve on BOSC, on SAB, on KSAC, that they are no longer going to be receiving grants from this agency. They will have to choose either the grant or service, but not both. And that will be something the American people can look at and have confidence that the information we're relying upon in rulemaking is secure and actually integrity in those decision making. So I really wanted to share, with the members of Congress that are here, thank you for your leadership over the last several years. I know this has been an area of focus for you. And this policy directive will take effect immediately. And we expect in the next week to announce all the individuals that will be serving in the capacity on these boards. We're going to be reaching out to them to advise them of this policy. Some of those individuals have received grants historically, and they will have to make a choice. In the book of Joshua, and I know Senator Inhofe is someone that recognizes this, but in the book of Joshua, there's a story about Joshua leading the people of Israel into the promised land after Moses passed away. And Joshua says to the people of Israel, choose this day whom you're going to serve. And I would say to you, this is sort of like the Joshua principle, that as it relates to grants from this agency, you're going to have to choose either service on the committee to provide counsel to us in an independent fashion, or choose the grant, but you can't do both. And that's the fair and right thing to do for the American people. So thank you for attending. I'm going to be signing a directive here in a moment or two, and I believe right now that Dr. McClellan, who was the first chair, as I understand, Dr. McClellan, of SAB from the 1980s, is going to say a few words. And thank you for coming, and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you very much, Administrator Pruitt. It's a real pleasure to be here today. This very special occasion, which I view in a broader context of celebrating the importance of science to the Environmental Protection Agency. You asked that I offer a few comments on giving a historical perspective. We got one thing a little bit wrong, and that is the first chair of the Science Advisory Board was the late Emil Merak, who at the time was Chancellor of the University of California, Davis, and a wonderful scientist and leader. I had the good fortune to be asked to serve on the executive committee with Emil, and then later I served as a chair of an ad hoc committee that reviewed the first criteria document in airborne lead. And I think they thought we did a good enough job that they said they need this on a continuing basis, and they put it into the Clean Air Act, and that became the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, which I had the opportunity to chair. So I think today we're again celebrating the fact that each of the EPA administrators has valued science as a undergirding of its activities. They've done that in different ways and to varying degrees. But I think it's been very clear that the administrators, and I know Administrator Pruitt, value science for informing important policy decisions and regulations. And I use that word inform because ultimately the buck stops there in terms of the congressional legislation that delegates to the EPA administrator the responsibility for making those decisions. But they have to be made grounded in that science. So I think that's very, very important. I think it's also important to recognize that the juncture we're at today, when the EPA was created, we had some very, very serious pollution problems. I think today we look back at the progress we've made. It's been absolutely remarkable. Americans are living longer, they have healthier lives, they have cleaner air, cleaner water, safer food. Our challenge today is to look at our activities in that broad context recognizing that many factors influence the well-being of the Americans, and that includes economic factors, welfare, etc. So I'm very pleased to see that you have moved and delegated charge to the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee responsibility for that clause in the Clean Air Act that so often has been ignored in the past. So I'm very, very pleased with the 3 individuals you've selected to provide leadership for the activities of the EPA. I know all 3 of them, Tony Cox, Paul Gilman, Michael Honeycutt. I've worked with them. They're not only good scientists and sound scientists, they have a breadth of understanding that they can make decisions, offer you advice in that broad context that we need today to continue us on the path that we're on, only at an accelerated pace. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And as Dr. McClellan indicated, we're actually announcing today, I'm announcing the chairman of each of these respective committees that I've made reference to, of both SAB, CASAC, and BOSC. The first of those individuals is Dr. Michael Honeycutt, who will serve as the chair of the Science Advisory Board. Dr. Honeycutt, would you mind coming up and saying a few words? Welcome, Dr. Honeycutt.
Thank you, Administrator Pruitt, for this wonderful opportunity and a lot of hard work. When I was offered the position of chairman of the SAB, the first thing I did was look at the statute that authorizes the SAB. And the thing I noticed is that it says that the SAB shall provide scientific advice not only to the administrator, but also to the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, to the House Committees on Science, Space, and Technology, on Energy and Commerce, and on Public Works and Transportation. So one advantage I have as a state regulator is that other SAB members may not have, is that I'm used to and I have experience in dealing with a legislative body that has authority over my activities. So one of the first actions that I will take as chairman of the SAB is to write those committees and offer the services of the SAB to those committees. And as I work with the new members of the SAB, with the existing members of the SAB, with other EPA committees, and with EPA staff, we will continue the SAB tradition of providing sound scientific advice to the administrator and to members of Congress to help inform our country's environmental policies, regulations, and activities. Thank you again, Administrator Pruitt.
Thank you, Dr. Honeycutt. Wonderful scientist. The only problem with Dr. Honeycutt is from Texas. And so we have a little this OU Texas thing going on. But in any event, welcome, Dr. Honeycutt, and thank you for your service to the SAB. Dr. Tony Cox is going to serve as the chairperson of the CASAC board. And Dr. Cox, welcome. Would you offer a few words as well? Dr. Cox.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to serve as chair of CASAC. I thank you for the opportunity to do so. It's also a challenge. It's a challenge to make science and scientific advice trustworthy, clear, open, and as valuable as possible at a time when politicization of science and skepticism about the independence and the credibility of scientists concerns so many of us. CASAC was established in the 1970s to put into practice certain principles that Congress and others believed would help scientists, that is, people who are curious about how the world works and who've been trained to find out, help them to bring to EPA valuable insights and advice, and to bring those also to a broader community of policymakers and the public. Congress believed then that scientists could help policymakers figure out how best to protect public health and to promote public well-being. They could do so by independently and candidly presenting both what is known and what is not known about the likely consequences, positive and negative, of proposed changes in the national ambient air quality standards. The idea was that a totally independent advisory committee could best serve the EPA and the public interest, and members of Congress who are interested in the science behind the policies. Such a committee would not build cases for or against particular policy positions. It would devote itself instead to discovering and to making clear the likely consequences of alternative policy choices. I believe those principles of independence, of factually focused science, and emphasis on identifying and clarifying the desirable and undesirable consequences of policies and proposed changes in policies are good principles for putting science into action in the service of the public interest. I intend to follow those principles. I warmly welcome the opportunity to work with other scientists and policymakers who look to CASAC for independent, transparent, high-quality scientific advice. I look forward to our work together, applying sound science to better inform regulatory policies and the public interest. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Cox. And Dr. Gilman is going to serve as the chairperson of BOSC. And Dr. Gilman, welcome. Would you offer a few words as well? Thank you, Dr. Gilman.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator Pruitt. Thank you first for your timeliness. The BOSC has oftentimes been a year or two post-election before it's really up and running again, and it's a pleasure to be given the task of getting things going in such a quick basis. I also want to thank you for the increased emphasis on state, local, and tribal governments. When I first met Roger, I was working for the state of New Mexico, and you got a real sense that you weren't always well represented in Washington, D.C., whether you were a Native American or you were a local government when you came from the Southwest. So I'm very appreciative of that. The BOSC has as its task helping an agency do good science. I think the key to using good science and using it well is doing good science. And so the BOSC is there to help the agency do that good science, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
And I want to emphasize something that Dr. Gilman just talked about. One of the objectives we have in populating BOSC and SAB and CASAC is to ensure geographical representation. That is very, very key. I think you'll see that on some of the boards that we have on display here. Historically, we've not seen geographical diversity or geographical representation. And as you might imagine, issues that affect Utah, the second most dry state in the country, are different than the issues that affect Minnesota. And so we need to make sure that we have individuals from across the full spectrum of our great country to ensure that we're receiving adequate input and counsel with respect to science and rulemaking. I think we're going to have members of Congress say a few words now, and I think Chairman Smith, you're the leadoff hitter, perhaps, with the comments here. So welcome, and I'm glad to see you. Chairman Smith.
Administrator, thank you, and I want to thank the senators, too, for an early slot. There's a mandatory meeting with the Vice President over in the House side with all the committee chairs at 1:15, so I'm going to try to get there as well. But this is a special occasion. We have an administrator who has common sense, who has commitment, and who has courage. And Administrator Pruitt is restoring the EPA advisory panels to their original purpose, to give the administrator objective advice on science and technology issues. For 8 years, the EPA has had science boards filled with members who have had conflicts of interest, and the administrator mentioned this a minute ago. It's impossible for these boards to be fair and balanced in their advice and their decisions when many board members are receiving grants and funds from the EPA itself. Earlier this year, the House passed a Science Committee bill called the EPA Science Advisory Reform Bill. It was introduced by Frank Lucas of Oklahoma and co-sponsored by 28 members of Congress, almost all members of the Science Committee. The legislation increases the transparency of the boards and the independence of its members. The goal of the legislation is to enable boards to provide unbiased scientific advice, which will help maintain their integrity. Administrator Pruitt's actions today enable us to put the principles of this bill into practice. Americans can thank Administrator Pruitt for advancing honest government, sound scientific opinions, and a more responsive EPA. Thank you, Administrator.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. And I do want to say that with respect to the interest, as we took applications for the SAB and for KSAC and for BOSC, we had over 430 applicants for the BOSC positions, over 130 for SAB, and 42 for KSAC. And the last, we only have 7 spots, so it was a 6-to-1 ratio. So we had tremendous interest by scientists across the country in serving in these capacities. And so it's an exciting time to see that kind of interest, and look forward to your leadership, gentlemen. I now get the pleasure of introducing my senator from the great state of Oklahoma. I don't get a chance to see him as much anymore, but he is such a blessing to me personally, and he's been a blessing to the state of Oklahoma. And Senator Inhofe, I really appreciate you coming today to recognize what we're doing as far as this policy directive. Senator Inhofe?
Well, that's great. I can't tell you guys how great it is to come into these buildings again and into the White House. I keep running into people I knew back during the Reagan administration, and it's really great. I'm sorry that Lamar is gone, because I had some things I was going to say about him. Lamar and I were elected in the 100th Congress. There are I'm going from memory now, I think there are 32 Republicans. And Mike, it's now down to 2 that are left out of that, Lamar Smith and me. Now, this guy over here, you need to know him a little bit better. He's fairly new, Congressman Mike Rounds. And I always remember, because he got on the committee when I was chairing the Environment and Public Works Committee. And I remember one time that he came up and was saying, you know, the subcommittee that you're on is oversight. And so he had oversight and was looking at this, and he said, am I seeing this right? There are several people in here that we're now being confirmed on these boards that do business with the state and with the committee. And here we had, as it's been pointed out by Administrator Pruitt, 6 out of 7 of the members of the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee had a total of more than $119 million in EPA grants. He said, isn't there something wrong with that? I said, you're thinking like people from South Dakota in America. So when you see these things that are going on, it's not just that. The idea that someone's not going to be able to receive grants from the EPA and still serve as a scientist, making decisions that would affect those, but also the diversity from the parts that, you know, we sat there and watched the same area of the country represented over and over and over again. And so it's such a joy to me, after suffering through that, to have not just a good Oklahoman as the director, but also, where's your chief of staff? He's around here somewhere. Yeah, he's also Oklahoma. In fact, he used to be my chief of staff. So I've trained him well for you. He'll do a good job for you. And being with all these great scientists here, we're going to get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing. You bet. And by the way, we will have votes in just a minute here.
And now I have the pleasure of introducing Senator Inhofe's colleague from South Dakota, Senator Rounds. Thank you for coming, and I appreciate your willingness to come over today and offer a few words. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon. Look, I'm Mike Rounds, and I represent the great state of South Dakota. And the one thing that I remember as I came into the Senate is that Jim Inhofe was one of these guys who was very, very active with regard to the Environment and Public Works Committee. He was the chairman, and I enjoyed serving under him. I actually had the opportunity to serve as the chairman of the subcommittee on Superfund waste management and regulatory oversight, which is where we had our discussion concerning the individuals who were serving on the different boards, and in some cases where the boards simply weren't meeting or they weren't being asked to do the work that we expected them to do. I would like to thank Administrator Pruitt for holding this event today. I applaud him for the steps he is taking to improve the scientific process at the Environmental Protection Agency. EPA regulations affect every American in every state across the country. The best and the most recent science should be the backbone of these regulations. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, the expectation is that we should rely on sound science. Administrator Pruitt has shown a renewed focus on improving the principles and the procedures relied on by the EPA when appointing members to the various scientific advisory committees, which are established by the EPA. These committees are tasked with providing independent scientific and technical advice as the EPA strives to accomplish its mission in protecting the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the land that we use. I'd like to congratulate those who have been named to the chair of the Science Advisory Board, the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, and the Board of Scientific Counselors today. These three well-qualified individuals will provide a fresh perspective in leading the committees under today's directive. Today's directive is a significant step forward towards making certain that these committees are comprised of independent and diverse individuals who can provide the Environmental Protection Agency with a variety of perspectives on the best way to accomplish its mission. Again, I'd like to thank the administrator for his commitment to making certain that the EPA relies on and has access to the best scientific advice that this country has to offer. Thank you.
Gentlemen, won't you, each of the chairs come up and I'm going to sign the document over here in a second. But let's just stand for a second. One of the things I want to echo what Senator Rounds just said is that as we engage in our rulemaking here at the agency, our focus should be sound science, not political science. And I think historically that has been in question because these are grants that have been issued and extended to individuals that have served in these respective committees. We want to ensure independence, and we want to ensure that we can have confidence in the counsel they're providing us as we do our job here at the agency. So I thank each one of you for how you're going to serve the American people and serve this agency. And to the senators, thank you again for your leadership on these issues. Appreciate it very much. Let's go over here and sign this document. If you guys want to come over, you're welcome to come over. All right. Thank you. Senator, thank you.